because of cold air, minus 30. It takes high altitude, around 30,000 feet plus. There's carbon dioxide and water vapor in that exhaust. That turns to ice crystals, and that's what you see, the white stream behind it.
Now, if you take a 2-mile walk on a cold day, and you can turn around and you can see your condensation trail tracking all the way back for 2 miles. That's how crazy it is to think that what we're looking in the sky is actually condensation trails.
What we're seeing now, and I first could not believe it, and I started looking at the skies, and these are not normal. They're not natural. There's something going on. I don't know who it is or why they're doing it. All I can testify is it's not natural and it's not normal. It's got to be some outside influence doing that. Okay?
I'm here to give you testimony that chemtrails, they're not contrails, are indeed real. They're spraying almost every day. I watch the clouds and watch the spraying program going on. I want to tell you that we're in very great danger from the pollution that's coming down over us. And we've been led astray by the military-industrial complex, and they're responsible for the cloud's creation and weather manipulation programs. They're dark operations. That's why they're not out in the media.
I look around and I see people are starting to look up and see this. Many times I've spoken about chemtrails, and I get this blank look on my face. What are you talking about? I'm saying, look up. As a pilot, before I fly, I look up. And so, boy, they're really out there working.
When you look up at the sun and you see a white haze, that is aluminum floating in the air, and it's coming from the aircraft.
There's a huge amount of aluminum being found because these sprays have aluminum, strontium, barium, manganese. And there's a lot of argument that aluminum is very common to be found. But aluminum is only common in a bonded form. It's not common in a free form, and we're finding high rates of free aluminum in the soil, which is not natural.
The metal compounds that are being used are environmentally dangerous. We need to be monitoring them. We need to be testing them.
Okay, these previous guys, I've watched exactly what they do, and yes, they are correct. I've seen exactly the same stuff, so ditto marks on those. You want some figures? Okay, latest water test. Tested the rain. 13,100 micrograms per liter of aluminum in the rain in 2013. Normally, it should be 0. So 13,100 is pretty damn much, folks. It used to be 0, then it was 100s in the 2000s, and then since 2010, it's into the 1,000s and the latest 13,100. In the snow on Mount Shasta, pristine Mount Shasta, 61,000 micrograms per liter, 4 times the amount that is found in the soil up there. Where in the hell is this stuff coming from?
Almost every day I'm seeing clouds I've never seen before. And NASA has been even named a few of these new clouds. And it's really interesting, but NASA is a corporation. I want you to know that.
NASA has also conducted a research program in what they call metallized fuels. We're actually putting aluminum oxide right in the fuel because it has 2 atoms of aluminum and 3 atoms of oxygen. So during the combustion process, it releases all that oxygen and dramatically increases efficiency.
But got things coming from sky down, and it's a huge, huge problem. Because as it comes down, what happens is a couple of things. Is that it actually is in our air. We breathe it. And as we breathe it, it's actually going to go up to our nostrils, into our brain, easiest access to our brain frontal lobe. The contaminants that have been identified, which already been mentioned, are aluminum. Aluminum is the #1 neural free radical generator to the brain to cause early apoptosis, which is early death of brain, and it begins to set off the scar tissue, which we call the amygdalin, which is part of the chemical matrix.
I'm a neurologist practicing in Reading for 17 years, and in the past 5 years, I have seen the number of patients with Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, and other neurodegenerative diseases tremendously increased, almost quadruple.
I became interested in chemtrails about 8 years ago when I was in Hawaii, and the Hawaiians are really being very vocal about it. I concur about the increasing number of Alzheimer's. They have been able to take the aluminum and micronize it, which means it'll stay up longer. But it also means, and I don't know if any of you have noticed a metallic taste in your mouth, when they're spraying. But you inhale that, it goes up through your cribriform plate and through your sinuses and into the brain.
As you heard, to spray nanoparticles, very small particles. These nanoparticles, they basically trigger a programmed cell death in the brain. And that is the ultimate path we see in Alzheimer's.
That's problem number one, because when we look at the Alzheimer issue, we say those are the old. The real problem is, and the real scare I have, is as I am a father of 2, I'm a grandfather of 3, so the drama is our children. ADD started in the 70s. Autism was not on the radar. There was no documents, there was no information. It was 1 in 100,000 children. Today, what we have is 1 in 48 boys. I was part of the early group that was looking for aluminum in ADD and ADHD. And all of those children that started to develop those phenomena had high levels of aluminum. When we figured out protocols to detox them out, to free the body of those particular contaminants, what happened is that their brains came back. When we do this to the age, it doesn't come back as quick, but it will come back. But I'm seeing Alzheimer's in 56 years old. Back in the 70s, Alzheimer's when you were 80.
If you remember 8 to 10 years ago, there was this big move to get rid of aluminum from underarm deodorant, as what causes Alzheimer's.
I want to give you a little bit of history on the background behind nanoparticles has been described before. A nanometer is 1/billionth of a meter. It's very small. In fact, if you have particles, say, that are 40 or 50 nanometers across, you can take and line 50 of them up next to a single red blood cell. These things are extremely tiny. They're pervasive.
Collapse and decrease of agriculture is something I worry about even more than the previous info about autism and Alzheimer's.
Believe me, I'm seriously concerned with what I'm watching. As a wildlife biologist, I've been watching the ecosystem collapse. When you lose all your stream organisms, when you have aluminum overload in your streams, you're killing your microbial bacteria and you're disrupting the entire ecosystem. So it goes way beyond just a little bit of pollution. How did Monsanto know to create aluminum-resistant plants? I don't think I've heard anybody ask that question. Okay.
Insects. I've done studies in Siskiyou County. They're at 20% of normal. The aquatic insects basically made a nosedive in 2006 to about 20% of normal. So far this year, I've sampled 200 trout stomachs. 98% of them are empty. So sorry about the trout fishing, fellows. The mayflies, stoneflies, dipterus, and caddisflies are damn near gone. The terrestrial sampling is down to about 20% of normal, except for pest species like ants. We're seeing a loss of the major bird species, and as the gentleman said, the ecosystem is unraveling, and Audubon's been telling you that for years.
Out of the air into the environment, it is small enough to be absorbed through the root structure of the trees in the forest. And so when there's a forest fire, and there will be a forest fire, those fires burn dramatically hotter. The point is that the cost of firefighting, the cost in the healthcare system have nearly doubled in the last 10 years. The amount of acreage is lost because of fires. The impact on human health is dramatic.
I personally tested water and aluminum, and I found aluminum had 47 times the normal expected amounts. Strontium had 10 to 20 times the amounts. Barium was 20 times. This is what the stuff looks like here. Collected, it looks, most people just think it's a cobweb, but I tested it, it has outrageous amounts of barium, strontium, and aluminum, but they destroy the sample. So
these tests are international in scope. We're seeing this all over the world, guys. Okay, pH of acid soils is 20 times more alkaline. The aluminum in the soil has doubled in the last 10 years. The rain normal was 5.6, it's 20 times more alkaline. Aluminum blocks essential nutrients. I am unable in my garden to restore normal pH, and that's because nanoparticles are now in the circulatory systems.
The Air Force conducted a study starting in 1993. It was called In Vitro Toxicity of Aluminum Nanoparticles in Rat Alveolar Macrophages. That's a real fancy way of saying testing the effect of aluminum nanoparticles on the white blood cells in the little air sacs in your lung, the alveoli. And what they found in this 8-year study was that these particles, when you're exposed to them long enough, it suppresses the ability of your white blood cells to defend you from airborne infections coming into your lungs. So it suppresses your immune system. But they also found that these same particles, once they get into your system, they can actually go through the barrier in each one of the cells. They get inside the cells. These particles can actually suppress the ability of mitochondria, which are in the cells that help to gobble up toxins and things that would be harmful to the nucleus and the reproduction process of the cells in your body. These processes are suppressed.
Air Force wrote a book, and on the first page of the book, they said, we're going to control the weather by the year 2025. I asked them, what are they doing, spraying these chemicals on the public? I said, there's violation of United States Code 50 USC 1520, which prohibits the American government from experimenting on the U.S. citizens with chemical agents. I said that law also requires who's ever experimenting, when the federal government does it, that they have to report to Congress within 30 days. They wrote back, they said they don't know what I'm talking about. We have enough evidence that there's a spraying going all over the place.
We were warned about the takeover of our freedoms by the military-industrial complex by both Eisenhower and Kennedy. They're gaining traction on us, folks. We are in trouble more than just the spraying program.
All I can say is it's about time we get up in arms about this, because it is affecting our health. It's high time that we as citizens of this great country take action.
Board of Supervisors in Suffolk County, New York, they outlawed geochemical engineering. Hawaii passed an ordinance prohibiting geochemical engineering. I urge you to bar geoengineering in Shasta County and pass an ordinance. At least ask some damn questions. What's the hell is all this aluminum doing here? Why are the trees dying? Fishes dying? Why is there Alzheimer and aluminum spiking?
Are you or a loved one suffering from a medical coincidence? You want proper medical care, but you don't want people sniffing around asking a whole bunch of questions about what might be causing your problem. At the Kaufman Institute for Coincidence, we won't look into the cause of your heart or other problem. We'll just fix it. That's right. We promise to only look at your symptoms. We won't get all curious looking for causes, because that could get your employer or your doctor into some legal hot water. And nobody wants that. At Kaufman, we understand that coincidence is now the leading cause of death.
Hey, we've got another coincidence over here.
If we want to operate at the speed of science, there's no time for looking for causes. No pesky questions about drugs or vaccines you may have been given. At Kaufman, we specialize in the effects and leave the causes to the conspiracy theorists. And let's be honest, we know the cause anyway. It was a coincidence, right? For each new patient, Kaufman's talented team of doctors strap on their blinders and look directly at the problem area, usually the heart, just like the CDC recommends. Our main campus now treats myocarditis, blood clots, heart arrhythmia, stroke, heart attack, magnetic skin, difficulty breathing, full body blisters and burning, convulsions, kidney failure, memory loss, cancer, sudden death, and much, much more. Give your coincidence the attention it deserves, but not the wrong kind of attention. At Kaufman. Schedule your appointment today at kaufmancoincidence.com and receive a doctor's note with a real sciencey sounding explanation to provide to your anti-vax friends, proving to them it was definitely not the vaccine that caused your coincidence. Kaufman, because coincidences happen pretty much all the time.
Hurricane Sandy to the Alberta floods. We're seeing more examples of extreme weather.
In the United States, authorities have warned of epic amounts of rainfall as Florence, now a tropical depression, continues to cross the Carolinas.
Now, this first portion of the radar cycle, fairly bland and typical, but then you see these bands of very distinct cloud cover moving into the region. That is not rain, that is not snow, believe it or not. Military aircraft flying through the region dropping chaff. Small bits of aluminum, sometimes it's made of plastic, or even metallicized paper products, but it's used as an anti-radar issue, and obviously they're up there practicing. Now, they won't confirm that, but I was in the Marine Corps for many years, and I'll tell you right now, that's what it is.
So let's say we were doing geoengineering because we wanted to make the weather a little bit better.
There will be monsoon failures during that period. There'll be huge hurricanes. The global studies indicate there will be some impact on precipitation patterns.
Might involve large-scale regional agricultural disruption lasting a number of years.
Potentially 2 billion people could have their food disrupted by such interventions.
That the aerosols can, at least in these model simulations or indicated by these simulations, can offset most climate change in most places most of the time for both precipitation and runoff. But it's likely to cause some damage in some places.
Sources on record is saying, quote, they want to control the weather by 2025, and we are not talking about just seeding the clouds for rain. Of April this year, there are more than 150 different weather modification programs around the world. Since about 2000, the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy have been spraying the entire United States sky with the toxic brew of chemicals and other biologic agents. Military and some commercial jets have been fitted with huge barrels of at least 49 different kinds of documented chemical poisons. Among other documented ingredients in this toxic man-made clouds are pathogenic molds, fungi.
What this is and why it's happening. Can you give us an introduction?
Yeah, again, the term geoengineering, aka chemtrails, the layman's term for what we see happening in the skies, but this is weather modification on a global scale. In fact, these programs are so large and so all-encompassing that all other weather modification programs that go on a smaller regional basis are virtually, they're negated by the scope and scale of the global geoengineering programs. And these programs involve a number of aspects. You have the saturation of the atmosphere with various chemical and metal particulates. And there appear to be various purposes and objectives with this saturation. In conjunction with the saturation, which ionizes the atmosphere, it makes the atmosphere more conductive, we have the HAARP facilities, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. These are ionosphere heaters. Many have heard of the HAARP facilities. There's not just one or two or three. We believe there's at least 18 around the globe, possibly with 3 more being built in Antarctica right now. And once the atmosphere is saturated with these particulates, and then you add the ionosphere heaters, the entire weather system globally is virtually being thwarted. There is no natural weather at this point, and we really don't know what sort of climate conditions we would have necessarily if these programs were brought to a halt. I mean, they desperately need to be brought to a halt because the saturation of the atmosphere is thwarting the hydrological cycle. It's totally disrupting the rain cycle. Again, we have the artificially nucleated snowstorms, which I just mentioned. You can't go from 100 degrees to snow in one day without a whole lot of help. This includes jet stream manipulation with the HAARP facilities, and we are not guessing at this. We have monitoring sources for this signal, and we can see where the signal is most intense, and that's what steers the jet stream. So then you add artificial ice nucleation, which is a chemical nucleation process. They can turn what should have been rain into snow and drop the temperatures of these storm systems by this artificial chemical nucleation. This isn't sci-fi. This is hard science fact. The weather disseminating agencies are trying desperately their task, and they're all owned at the very top, it appears, by the Rothschilds and or other parts of the global elite complex. Rothschilds in particular are ownership of Weather Channel, Weather Central, Weather Underground. And it was imperative that they own these agencies, otherwise there would be great discrepancy in trying to explain away these events.
Gates is backing the first high-altitude experiment of one radical climate change solution, creating a massive chemical cloud that could cool the Earth. It's called solar geoengineering. It would look something like this. Thousands of planes would fly very high and use nozzles to inject millions of tons of light-reflecting particles into the stratosphere.
Put another kind of pollution, sulfur dioxide, up to orbit, cover the atmosphere. The sky won't be really blue in the way it is now anymore.
Blanketing the Earth in sulfuric acid, because I'm all for it. This is the all-chocolate dinner. I still get to have my CO2, and I just need to spray sulfuric acid right all over the Earth.
People and older people relative to working-age citizens. Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. An SAI program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly. As promising as it may be, moving forward on SAI would also raise a number of challenges for our government and for the international community. On the technical side, greenhouse gas emission reductions would still have to accompany SAI to address other climate change effects, such as ocean acidification, because SAI alone would not remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. On the geopolitical side, the technology's potential to alter weather patterns and benefit certain regions of the world at the expense of other regions could trigger sharp opposition by some nations. Others might seize on SAI's benefits and back away from their commitment to carbon dioxide reductions. And as with other breakthrough technologies, global norms and standards are lacking to guide the deployment and implementation of SAI and other geoengineering initiatives. Now, I could go on and on and on and on about the things that fascinate me, but rather than talk about them, I thought I'd stop here.
Citizens movement demanding an explanation of chemtrails.
And I talked to my NSA buddies at Fort Carson, Peterson Air Force Base, and Buckley, where I was actually their doctor taking care of the pilots flying and spraying the chemtrails. So I know it's real. If anybody says it's not real, they're full of it.
It's not the same as conducting some localized test for some defensive project. This is open air operations. It's not a test. This thing is in place.
Talking about this a few years ago was extremely dangerous. Now that we have YouTube and more social networking devices, such as even Rupert's MySpace, this is really getting out in such a way that they can't control it. They must just be really, if you could use the expression, shitting themselves over this, because they can't control people now talking about the elephant in the room, what is so obvious to all of us.
There's a feeling from that area that the states doing all of these weather modification programs might not be doing it for the benefit of the citizens of Texas and other states that they may impact as well.
Well, many of the planes that we're seeing here in Abilene will actually turn whatever they're spraying on and off right before our eyes. I mean, you'll see a plane up there flying like normal, and then all of a sudden it starts spraying. We've seen them fly off into the distance and then loop around and fly back again. These are not your typical planes with a preordained path destination from city to city. Someone needs to explain to me, why do they stop traveling in one particular direction and then loop around and come back again? They perform this behavior so many times that we start seeing the tic-tac-toe grids in the sky. We're witnessing the giant X's. And I mean, Rosalind, when you and I grew up, these contrails naturally dissipated in a few seconds or perhaps a minute max. But these things expand, they grow bigger, and before you know it, the entire sky is overcast.
That's correct. And they are there all day. They do loop the loop around our county and our state. We follow them at times with spotters in different areas, watching the planes loop, come back around. And we know from the FAA records that the jets from commercial airlines fly in straight lines. And coming across our county, there aren't many, and they stay mostly in certain patterns. The jets that we see leaving the persistent jet contrails move in directions that normal jets wouldn't fly because it would use too much fuel and put them off schedule. And the jets that we see here do loops. We've got pictures of them looping the same X's and crosshatches. But I believe that some of that, not only are they looking for keeping something in the air almost all the time, but we feel that some of the markings are to mark the start and stop areas for their programs so that they can watch their experiments either from satellite or the ground.
Why do they want to keep this quiet? Why aren't they talking about this? Why don't they want us talking about it? And you can only come to the conclusion that they're hiding something.
Now, do you believe that this is a full-scale secret operation that includes not only the U.S. but Europe and the rest of the world?
Well, that's apparent because you can see the pictures from all over the world, and I get them constantly. Some areas are worse than others. The excuse for this is, number one, weather modification, number two, to save us from global warming, and number three, to save us from the terrorists. A lot of these programs, of which there are many patterns and which has been designated as wake vortex simulation carried out by NASA Langley Research Center, many of these operations and the patents go on to explain how if there is a biological attack by terrorists at some point, that these exercises and practices will, in a sense, save us with the spider webbery that comes down from the aerosol spraying, potentially gathering the chemical mass spray that could be sprayed on any given population. The problem with that is the terrorists don't have the means to deliver this. They don't have the access to deliver this over the American populace per se. And the only people who have been doing this, that is biological experiments on the American people, is the military themselves, which has been admitted from everything from Operation Shad to the spraying that happened in San Francisco, I believe back in the 60s and the 70s, that literally killed people.
Again, I may not be able to ascribe intent, but what I can say is that it is expected that there will be increased mortality as well as the potential of a huge host of unknown pathogens that we are subject to, and this is not based on speculation. There's a whole arena of biological research that we haven't even begun to touch on.
Could a strange substance found by a Southwest Arkansas man be part of a government
found in our sample?
At a community in the San Bernardino Mountains has a real mystery on its hands. The official explanation here is that jet contrails are causing strange lines in the sky.
What effect barium has in the body. Short-term exposure can lead to anything from stomach to chest pains. Long-term exposure causes blood pressure problems. Ryan addressed concerns by chemtrail researchers that barium could be meant to wear down a person's immune system.
You're talking about dominating our air supply without the human consent in a way that is difficult for many of us certainly to conceive, and certainly many of us refuse to accept it even in the light of sufficient and overwhelming evidence.
But some of what we are seeing is man-made, but man-made in a different way than you may guess. Weather modification programs, experimental ones done by private companies, done by the United States government, done by states across the United States, are underway. There's more than 50 of them in operation across the United States. All of these impact agriculture because they change the microclimates needed for agriculture to survive. None of these programs that I know of today, and this is all public record, are available at any time with oversight, agricultural oversight or public oversight. These programs impact agriculture, and there are programs around the world. International corporations are modifying our weather all the time, and they're modifying it in ways that cover thousands and thousands of square miles. Most of it is chemically altered, so that what happens is that we are putting chemicals, ground-based chemicals that are shot into the air, or chemicals coming from airplanes that change and modify our weather. So one of the things that I'm concerned about and that we need to address in the future is how these programs are impacting microclimates needed for our crops to survive and needed for pollination. If we change the growing season, the pollinators may not survive, and also our crops, our flowers, and our tree crops may not get the pollination needed. So one of my areas is looking at this situation to see if we can begin to put under control experimental and other types of weather modification programs. The other issue is that a lot of times we're talking about mitigation for climate change. It's rather an undefined term at this period of time. And so what happens is that many times we're talking about artificially putting chemicals like sulfur or particulates into the atmosphere in what they call geoengineering schemes to reduce and help the planet, supposedly, but help the planet to not go through such a tremendous global climate change and to mitigate global warming. However, the incidence of putting chemicals into our atmosphere is going to change and impact agricultural crop production. And if you take and you put up into our skies chemicals to reduce the amount of sunlight reaching the earth, you are going to begin to reduce crop production. Studies at the University of Illinois on corn crop production show reductions. Without the process of photosynthesis, whereby plants from direct sunlight gain the energy to grow, to produce crops, we are going to find ourselves, if we mitigate in that direction, impacting the crop production not only here in the United States, but worldwide. One of the things that is impacting crop production right now in the United States and reducing photosynthesis and also impacting the ability of solar power panels to generate the type of power that they should is persistent jet contrails. NASA talks about persistent jet contrails as exacerbating global warming because they trap warmth in the atmosphere when they produce cirrus and man-made clouds. NASA also talks about that that these aircraft leaving persistent contrails are changing our climate. And when they change our climate to the degree that one jet can leave a persistent jet contrail, which will spread across our skies, from what this picture up here on my left on the screen looks like, which is a trail left by a jet, that trail can expand to 4,000 kilometers and last for 20 hours. This was unheard of in the early 60s and the 70s, and it wasn't until the late 1980s that there was a change and we started to have persistent jet contrails that persist. NASA studies show that part of our global warming problem could be attributed to these types of contrails and the jets that leave them. So one of the issues as we go through is, how do you like your skies, natural or man-made? And right now we are making man-made clouds, and this is trapping warmth in our atmosphere. The climate change that is produced by these jets, not all jets, mostly some non-commercial, but what happens to our skies is that we start to see the changes. The man-made clouds do trap the warmth, and they increase the humidity. This allows for pests to proliferate, diseases, molds, mildews, funguses, and viruses. This is a man-made cloud, ladies and gentlemen, and these pictures I took myself over Northern California, and this is a burst. This is where a jet left a huge plume, and then this turned in at the end of it to a burst, and this is not normal, never seen before in our county historically, and I was born and raised there. This is another picture showing the jet trail just before the burst. This is our skies, and I want you to know that what you're seeing now, a lot of times many scientists know, especially at NASA and in other areas, that the skies that we're seeing are not normal cloud formations. These are man-made. And what happens as we reduce the amount of sunlight in a form of global dimming, we reduce the solar power with these type of clouds, and we reduce photosynthesis, which is going to impact agriculture. The pictures look odd. The formations don't look like normal clouds that people have seen before historically. This is another type of man-made cloud, and what we have done and what you're seeing here is we have the photographs from the times that the jet leaves the first trail as a thin, spindly trail to where they form into these different types of cloud formations. All of you can start looking up and seeing this. What happens is that there are experiments, and there's a color, you can see some color in this photograph, and part of what we're doing also is we're sending up canisters. The United States government, NASA, the U.S. Air Force, is sending up canisters into the atmosphere filled with chemicals to modify and experiment with our ionosphere. And when we modify and experiment with our ionosphere up here, we create experiments which they can see through these persistent jet contrails as they stay in the sky for long periods of time, and they can watch the experiments. The type of chemicals they are using are aluminum, barium, strontium, and these canisters are sent up on rockets, and what they do is they superheat the canisters to create experiments in our atmosphere. The experiments can give you colorful auroras, which they talk about as being wonderful. Many times people think that the auroras in Alaska and the ones we see are normal, but there's beginning to be more and more seen across the United States and elsewhere where trimethyl aluminum experiments to make clouds are beginning to impact us. The reason I am concerned for agriculture is that none of these experiments have any public oversight nor agricultural oversight. Our drinking water is impacted because the chemicals are now beginning to show up in our drinking water. In California, the State Department of Health drinking water tests were examined between 1970 and this year, and we found unusual spiking in barium, aluminum, strontium, magnesium, calcium, manganese, and all of these spiked at the same time in various drinking water supplies across the state of California and also in Arizona. So what's happening with these atmospheric tests is that aluminum, as one example, gets into, with increased pollution and acid rain, gets into the root systems of our crop trees and our trees, and it looks like the trees are dying of drought, but they're not. What happens is that the root systems can no longer absorb the water and the nutrients needed to survive. Many of our forests in Redding, California, and other areas are dying. The oak trees, the redwood trees, the Douglas fir, across the United States, many areas. We believe that these trees are impacted because they cannot absorb enough water because aluminum is going into their root systems. Also, molds, mildew, and fungus from warmer temperatures produced by persistent jet contrails are also allowing pests and molds to proliferate, also impacting tree health and crop health. The skies that you see up here, it is important to note, have a white haze to them. When crossing the United States 2 days ago, we saw this man-made produced haze all the way across the United States. There were a few real clouds. We saw the persistent jet contrails from the jet windows, and the skies in the white haze looked a lot like this. So one of the things that we need to really look at is that jet fuel emissions contaminate our air, much as automobile exhaust. They know from scientific studies back in the 1970s that they deplete beneficial ozone in the atmosphere by releasing nitric acid. So one of the things that we need to look at is the impact of just jet fuel and just the emissions from jets as well. I want to go on and talk briefly about a couple of issues here that I think are important for everyone to realize. If we don't look at the problems that we are creating, the atmospheric testing programs, in other words, the jet contrails that are warming our climate, and we say to ourselves, we want to geoengineer something else. We want to add more particulates to help global warming or to stop climate change. What we're going to have is we're going to have a pea soup up there of chemicals, which are going to be detrimental to our health.
Look at that shit.
Friend who is still an Air Force pilot. This pilot is saying that he flies chemtrail flights. This pilot told my cousin that this global geoengineering effort goes by the name of, quote, Indigo Skyfold, unquote. At least within the circle of pilots and aviation crews that he works with, They are told to fly specific routes and satellite comm links controlled aerosol dispersal patterns. He says that they only make course corrections from time to time and perform landings and takeoffs. Pilot, navigation, and maintenance crews are rotated constantly and only spend about 18 months at one given base. He states that this is to keep pilots and their families from making too many friends and ending up with loose lips. They are told to simply do their job and shut the F up. First of all, I would like to say I do not agree with my mission assignments, but what soldier ever truly does? Several of us have considered bucking the ranks and going AWOL from time to time. We are kept in the dark when it comes to getting honest answers about what we are really spraying. Should they discover that we or our families are actively inquiring about our so-called chemtrails term, then automatic and swift disciplinary action will be taken. I would not intentionally spray my children or family with toxic aerosols, but as you must know, 80% or better do not have any family or children. Indigo pilots are chosen from the top ranks within the Air Force, Navy, and Coast Guard. Most of the pilots are, quote, hardened to humanity, unquote, and could care less about killing off unwanted or leeching aspects of America and the world.